Hello, Prestige heads, and welcome to yet another video exclusive episode of American Prestige. We are going to do increasingly more of these, so if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the YouTube. We know you want to see our faces. We have high demand for that. So here we are, and we are welcoming back to the podcast my old friend from college, David. I'm not sure if we actually knew each other in college. We were in like peripheral circles. I feel like there were circles, and like you're on one end and I was on the other end, but like I knew of you, certainly.
I definitely I'm going to sound like a jerk here, but I definitely learned about you years later.
Oh,
But
no,
we
that's
have known
fine.
each other a long time now. Uh,
That's fine. I think I knew who you were in college, though. Did you write for The Spectator?
Occasionally,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's probably where. But anyway, now that we've got that out of the way, we are welcoming back David to the show. David Klion, who's an editor at Jewish Currents. He's a columnist at The Nation, and he's also working on a book about the neoconservative movement. And he's somehow become both our Jewish desk and our Barry Weiss desk, two topics that we may talk about today. Certainly the first one. But David, thank you so much for joining us as always.
Always a pleasure.
So you recently wrote an article about the anti-Semitism on both the right. Well, the anti-Semitism was on the right, but we might talk about it as a broader phenomenon in American society right now. But why don't we just start with what made you want to write this article, and what is the state of anti-Semitism in the United States, which for decades I think was really not much of a problem, at least at the structural level, but seems to have reared its ugly head yet again. So, what are your thoughts on that? And we'll go from there.
Well, it's funny because there's how so I wrote this article for The Nation as a regular column I have there about a month and a half ago in mid-May. And in order to answer your question, I feel like I have to historicize it a bit because the mindset I was in when I wrote that and am still in now is very different from the mindset I've been in for most of the past few years. And I've gone on record about that. I've written about it in various places before. I've tweeted about it, given interviews about it. So I want to say where I'm coming from on this before I talk about where I'm sort of at. Where I'm coming from is, it's been widely discussed for years now, and certainly since the October 7th attacks, which were almost 3 years ago, um, that there's this unprecedented surge in anti-Semitism in America after, a golden age, as Franklin Foer called it on the cover of The Atlantic, where, it was pretty great to be a Jew in America, which was the era we were born into in the 80s. But, really the era from, let's say, the 60s or 70s until quite recently, if you buy this thesis. And I have pushed back a lot against this thesis, as I think most left-wing Jews and anti-Zionist Jews have, because the vast majority of what is being discussed is simply anti-Zionism and pro-Palestinian activity. And the discussion of an upsurge in it after October 7th overwhelmingly, I think, has referred to that, right? And it's not, although it's often maintained in bad faith by figures like the infamous Jonathan Greenblatt, who runs the Anti-Defamation League, who is largely responsible for enforcing these standards and making them seem like standards. I think to get a little empathetic about it without excusing, I think that if, let's say, an observant Jew who wears a kippah and is and grew up in like a Jewish day school in a heavily Jewish community, goes to a school like Columbia or Harvard, and they're 19, 20 years old, and they've been raised hawkishly Zionist their whole lives. That's like hegemonic. And then they go to a place where not only is that not universally held to be true, but especially after October 7th, there's, incredibly vocal, agitated pushback against it. And there's, there's encampments, which I supported and visited the one at Penn and, continue to support in hindsight. You see Palestinian flags everywhere. You see people calling Israel, a settler colonial state, all of which I agree with. And you feel attacked. You feel like your identity as a Jew, which has always been synonymous with Zionism, is attacked. And the authorities in your community say anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and they say all these things that are being expressed are anti-Semitic. So when you're someone like that, or you're some Jew on the street in New York or whatever, and you see, Palestinian flags everywhere, and you see protests, you think what you're seeing is anti-Semitism. Now, I think that's ridiculous, and I've spoken out about it many times, but you think it is, and you report it, and boom, now we have figures. I mean, my colleague at Jewish Currents, Mari Cohen, has written in a lot more depth about like how, bogus these figures are. But you have figures showing an upsurge in quote unquote anti-Semitism. Um, and I blame the Jewish establishment, people like Greenblatt, but also, most mainstream synagogues and the umbrella groups like the Union of Reform Judaism that they're associated with. I blame Barry Weiss. I blame the Jewish right. I blame major Jewish figures in mainstream media like Dana Bash and Jake Tapper. I mean, I blame the Israeli state and its propaganda. So anyway, that's all to say that the anti-Semitism panic has been, I think, just that, a panic. Now, there has been, of course, some degree of resurgent anti-Semitism on the right, going back really to the first Trump administration, when we had the Charlottesville March and the Tree of Life massacre, and a lot of just kind of Jew baiting from the far right that supported Trump. I think that felt like a real crisis at the time. And I think it was opening the door to something. But I also would be hard pressed to say that like the character of American Jewish life or safety fundamentally changed in the wake of those horrible moments. And there have been individual horrible moments in American history. And then I think this was furthermore kind of muddled by the fact that from Barry Weiss to Greenblatt to people like Dara Horn or Chuck Schumer in his book, which I shredded last year on fighting anti-Semitism, they've all basically put forward a version of the same obnoxious thesis, which is that anti-Semitism transcends left and right. There is right-wing anti-Semitism, which is explicit and Nazi, and we all surely agree that's bad, and that's easy to condemn. But then there's the more insidious left-wing anti-Semitism, by which they clearly mean criticism of Israel, and they're pretty explicit about that. And they're like, this is actually the more dangerous anti-Semitism because of the way it embeds itself in mainstream, respectable liberal environments like academia. So, my take on all of this has been consistently for the last however many years, pretty much what I just said. Now, I have become a little more concerned about anti-Semitism in the last, I want to say, 6 months, maybe. So deep into the October 7th era, and I've become concerned about it on the right, where I think it has become way more explicit among some very influential mainstream figures. To a much lesser extent, I recognize a version of it on the left, though I think it's largely confined to like random protests or online voices that have become a little louder. I don't think it has. I don't think, for instance, to take the most obvious examples of influential voices on the left who have been called anti-Semites, I don't think any members of Congress in the squad are remotely anti-Semitic. I don't think Zoran Mamdani is anti-Semitic. I don't think Hassan Piker is anti-Semitic. Just to get that out of the way, I do not think that, and I have endless respect and support for all of those people. The voices I'm talking about are fringier than them, but I do think they've gotten a little louder, and I do encounter them sometimes. But I think first I should talk about the resurgent anti-Semitism on the right because it's a much more important.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, there's a bunch of questions about. First of all, what do we mean by anti-Semitism? Is of course the first question, and then the more important question is, what do you think is causing this resurgence? I have this pet theory about as World War II and the Holocaust retreat further into memory, it's become less a normative element in American society to be worried about anti-Semitism, and then of course the post October 7th response, Israel response to Gaza. I mean, the genocide in Gaza is clearly a major cause of that, but it also, I think, runs deeper. So maybe you could just define what you mean by anti-Semitism, and then what do you think is causing it on the right wing?
Absolutely. So my definition of anti-Semitism, I think, is kind of banal, or should be banal, but it's just gotten so bent out of shape by this kind of concept creep to encompass anti-Zionism. I think anti-Semitism is a virulent hatred of Jews, qua Jews, not Zionists, not Israel, Jews. I think that it is a baseline. There's a conspiratorial dimension to it that separates it from some other kinds of bigotries that's often been remarked upon. But, basically a belief that Jews are a kind of parasitic element, hostile to any and all societies they're in, that they secretly manipulate the world, and you know that they're inherently nefarious, and that they are the evil conspiracy that controls the world, as opposed to, say, capital or patriarchy or imperialism or whatever. All of which, of course, various Jews are sometimes complicit in. Actually, another article we should discuss that I wrote in the last few months is the one I wrote about Jeffrey Epstein and his Jewishness for Jewish Currents, which is highly germane here, I think, because that was an article where I was trying to deconstruct some anti-Semitic theories that I saw cropping up. Well, I should say, first of all, that if we're going to talk about why is anti-Semitism resurgent, I think your point that World War II and the Holocaust are fading into historical as opposed to living memory is completely true and relevant.
Just a very quick two-finger, as everyone loves me saying. I think that also explains the reemergence of Nazi symbology, which
Absolutely.
was really taboo, except for like the super far neo-Nazi right and like various punks between 1976 and 1978.
Yeah.
I think the resurgence of that is also. I think a lot of things are actually part of a longer process of the mass experience of World War II having really faded. But I think this is something to explore more. But
Yeah. I mean,
apologies for
I'm not
interrupting.
an expert on it, though I was just there for a week. But the resurgence of the far right in Germany, I think, is probably also in part that you have just like generations that are just like, why are we still talking about what our great grandparents did? Like, let's talk about Germany now, the AfD. But I think so. I think it's partly that. I think obviously what Israel has done is hugely a part of it. But here, and I talk about this in my Nation piece, I don't think it's just that Israel, the Jewish state, is committing these atrocities. I think it's that virtually all mainstream institutional Jewish life around the world, including in the United States, has backed Israel, endorsed most or all of what Israel is doing. In the most liberal cases, tried to scapegoat Netanyahu after it had been going on for like a year or two, which is just not, first of all, they backed it all for a long time. Second of all, it's just not true. Like, Netanyahu is horrible, but there is a near universal society-wide consensus among Jewish Israelis, minus a rounding error percentage, for what they've been doing. So, when you have the Jewish state committed to what everyone should be able to see as a genocide, when you have Jewish institutions all at the very least running interference for it, and when you have leading Jewish authorities like the ADL saying explicitly that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I mean, frankly, Ezra Klein, to speak of a not particularly radical Jew, said it best in a Times column that I quote some months ago. Let me quote exactly what he said here. He said, "Anti-Zionism is rising as a response to what Israel is doing. It will simply not be possible to treat it as a marginal viewpoint that can be shamed or shunned into invisibility. If you keep telling people that if they oppose the Jewish state, that they must hate the Jewish people, eventually they will believe you." I couldn't have said it any better. Ezra is right, and that is exactly what's happening. You could say they've cried wolf. You could say that they've diluted the concept of anti-Semitism into meaninglessness, which is quite dangerous, because I do believe anti-Semitism exists and is real. I mean, obviously, the Holocaust happened. Many other persecutions of Jews have happened. And I wouldn't say I've encountered a lot of it in my life. And in particular, I wouldn't say I've encountered it in a structural way, which makes it very different from how we talk about racism in this country, right? I mean, there are people running around saying the N-word and other white supremacist things, but the real reason racism is a consistent problem is not because those people still exist. It's because American life is so holistically structured around a legacy of America being a white supremacist apartheid state, and in ways where you don't even have to be individually racist at all to be carrying out racist structures. And I really don't think that there's anything analogous to that when it comes to anti-Semitism. It's just not the same thing, not in America today.
So, just I do have a couple of questions about the right wing, because structurally, anti-Semitism in Europe has been, I think, correctly analyzed as like the Jew formed this literal capital O other around which Christian society in Europe for centuries really identified itself, sort of made normative frameworks around what was allowed, what was not allowed, and culminating, of course, in the Holocaust.
And we should say, as good Marxists, there's a political economic dimension to this, right? Europe was ruled by the aristocracy and the clergy, and was a land-based civilization basically until modernity, and the Jews were, relegated in. Were in a kind of symbiotic relationship with that society as merchants and traders and craftsmen, which were, and moneylenders, which were despised professions that would turn out to be extremely valuable in modernity. This is Yuri Sloskin's thesis.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so there was they hated the Jews because they hated all the elements of proto modernity that the Jews were
Yes.
identifying.
And there is that religious element going back to Aquinas and Augustine about what role should the Jew be, etc. So anti-Semitism, of course, has existed throughout American history. There have been various moments of violent anti-Semitism. People often point to the Leo Frank lynching in the 19 teens to highlight that, but it has functioned very differently. I think primarily due to the way that race functioned in American society, which is built on primarily indigenous slavery, indigenous genocide, and then enslaved people primarily from Africa, if not totally from Africa. And so there have been moments of anti-Semitism, particularly in the 30s with the Bund, particularly in urban areas in the Northeast where there were actually Jews, but it was always, I think, at least a minor key in the history of American racism.
I agree.
Jews assimilated relatively quickly, were amalgamated into this broad concept of whiteness over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries, and things that you just
for
wouldn't have.
most legal purposes, other than like certain elite WASP institutions being
Yeah.
able to discriminate against the richest of us, for most purposes, Jews from Europe, the vast majority of Jews in this country, were white off the boat.
Yeah, genteel anti-Semitism is oftentimes what that's referred to.
Right.
There's a famous Gregory Peck movie, I think in 46, like Yale only tenures a Jewish faculty member in 1946, and there were anti-Jewish quotas,
Right.
but it's just a
But
primarily a different.
fundamentally, like off the boat, we could vote, we could own property, we could get rich. We had rights that we had never had in Europe, and we were not subjected to constant pogroms. And it just
Right.
yeah.
And so a very different thing. Like you wouldn't see, I think it was the Secretary of War of the Confederacy was a Jewish man named Judah P. Benjamin. One of the big funders of the American Revolution was Chaim Solomon. There were many Jews around FDR in the 30s while they're being, kicked out of German society. There's never the Pale of Settlement, so it's a totally different thing
Right.
in the United States. So what role maybe do you think anti-Semitism is structurally playing here? Because like Nick Fuentes is obviously anti-Semitic. There are other people on the far right fringe that do talk about,
I'm not sure we can say fringe anymore. I think Candace Owens is blatantly anti-Semitic and has a vast audience. I think Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson have basically landed in that space and have massive audiences. I think that
What of Tucker and Megyn Kelly? I think Fuentes, I would say, is still fringe, and this is the problem with politics today, right? Like there is no mass politics and there is no mainstream, so it's very difficult to distinguish. I think as you're gesturing toward correctly, what is fringe, what is mainstream? Someone has X number of viewers on YouTube or Twitter, like that Bilzerian guy, I forget his name.
right, Dan
Yeah. And so, maybe like Tucker, I think, would be a properly mainstream, more aligned with that. What is Tucker said? I haven't kept up with him. I know he's been extremely
for one thing,
anti-Zionist.
he had a friendly interview with Fuentes. That was, I think, last October, maybe, and that was
Yeah, but that was I think more complex. I'm of the Bob Wright school of this. Like that, yes, it was friendly, but also like I think part of that was Tucker being like, I'm not him. So I think there were things going on there, like politically, that he's trying to deal with the far right young fringe, but also distinguishing himself. But yes,
see, I
we
see
wouldn't have
it
Fuentes
differently.
on.
I see it as like, without perfectly equating left and right, like if, let's say, Ezra Klein were to like bring, I mean, now he does, but if it wasn't always the case that like someone with our politics might like be brought on to a friendly interview on the New York Times, right? That has been happening more as the left's power has grown and gotten more mainstream in America. And so people like Ezra or the Pod Save America guys might like bring a socialist on, not to say we agree with 100% of what this person is saying, but to say we acknowledge that they are a part of the tent and we have to have a good open line of communication with them in a way we didn't necessarily acknowledge in 2016. Um, and I see this as roughly the right equivalent. When Tucker Carlson brings Nick Fuentes on his show, he's saying blatant neo-Nazi anti-Semitism is just part of the right now, and I'm okay with that. And I think he's hinting at that pretty strongly all the time. I don't think Fuentes is the limit of it. He also says things that just rub me fundamentally the wrong way as a Jew, that we're a Christian civilization or whatever. I mean, the right has been saying stuff like that for a while, but usually with
Yeah.
workarounds for the Jews. And I
The wackiest thing I've seen was Megyn Kelly saying something like, "I don't like Islam." Like, it was so blatant recently. She's
well,
just like, "I don't like Islam."
Well,
You know?
anti-Islamism has, I think, for a while on the right
Yeah, it's just been
functioned
permanent. Yeah.
as has played the structural role of anti-Semitism. And I would also argue, without getting too deep into this topic, I think that the trans panic in some ways resembles classical anti-Semitism a lot. I mean, in some ways, it obviously resembles homophobia, but I think the trans panic, which sees this, tiny minority as not just offensive in and of itself, but as a sort of fundamental threat to like how the vast majority conceives of its own gender identity and its own norms, and is sort of like inherently sexually predatory and kind of burrowing into our spaces. All has some, and I have seen people go from like just asking seemingly reasonable questions about the trans issue to full-blown conspiratorial panic, like in real time online. I'm sure you have too. It's a wild thing to witness.
Yeah. I think we're thinking of the same people.
Yeah,
Um, but okay, so sorry. To return to the right, like Fuentes
yeah,
obviously like just says Nazi-esque things about the Jews. I think Tucker flirting with Fuentes certainly by bringing him on. There's no way to deny that. But what else have you seen on the right in addition to that? And then what the interesting thing is, of course, is like the guy who was in charge of the deportation is a Jew from Santa Monica named Stephen Miller.
yes.
So
Though he very rarely calls attention to his own Jewishness, but yes, this is true. Um, so actually, I have one from the Epstein piece because I think the Epstein story has also been the other major reason why anti-Semitism is becoming mainstream.
didn't help the Jews, David. That
Not,
didn't help
it's
the
not
Jews.
good for the Jews, and I wrote this whole piece, and I want to talk a little about the reception of this piece too.
Please do.
Um, because it's highly germane here. But Candace Owens at one point tweeted, this was in reference to Epstein, "We are ruled by satanic pedophiles who work for Israel, and this is the synagogue of Satan we are up against." Now, that's clearly anti-Semitic rhetoric. I mean, let's be real. Like, nobody says that without knowing exactly what they're doing. And there are plenty of ways I mean, for instance, the line that Ro Khanna and John Ossoff, who was Jewish, have been using, that the Epstein class is the enemy, does not strike me as in any way the same.
No, of course, it is definitely
Yeah,
playing with anti-Semitic tropes, but as you well know, um, the Jewish establishment has so for decades just associated Jewry with Israel,
yeah,
like so consciously. We both went to synagogues, I bet, with Israeli flags up on the
yes,
stage. So this is where like the sort of discursive place that people are swimming in. But yeah, clearly that's playing with anti-Semitic the synagogue of Satan.
yeah.
Yeah,
No, I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, the rhetoric I see from people like Owens and Fuentes, and to an extent Kelly and Carlson, and I'm sure others, is, and even from like Elon Musk doing his like Nazi salute and everything, and a lot of the big accounts he's sort of rigged Twitter to promote. The rhetoric I see from all of them is pretty classic anti-Semitic rhetoric from, these are not stupid. And Tucker Carlson is a very smart man. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's making a conscious choice to do this. And he used to know a lot of Jews. I mean, he got his start at the Weekly Standard working.
I think a lot of this is a rejection of those
I,
people, actually, for
I
him
absolutely
personally.
believe that's
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
I think that's essential. And Jason Zengerle's new book on Tucker gets into this a lot, but I totally believe that. But I think that, to find precedents in American history, I think you can go back to some extent to Joseph McCarthy, though I don't think he was quite this blatant. And, anti-communism, I mean, there were plenty of Jewish liberals or Jewish proto-neoconservatives like Irving Kristol who were on board with his anti-communism. So, but there was certainly an undercurrent to it. I think really you'd go back to the 30s and to Father Coughlin and Henry Ford to see the kind of rhetoric that is now being mainstreamed again almost a century later on the right.
So what role do you see it serving? Because I don't think that they're going to, put together the Gestapo to get the Jews. So like
I
this
don't
is
think
this
they
is the
have, and I
interesting.
hope they never have the power to do that. But
Right.
what
So like
role does it
what
serve?
is it doing? Is it like a sort of you're in or you're out? Because there's yeah, I don't know. What do you think it's doing? It's
Well,
very
I
complex.
think
It's
it's
interesting.
partly that it's a signal. It's like I'm based, and we're not like these other people. But I think if you think of the Republican Party as coming off of a series of legitimacy crises in our lifetime, I mean, start with the neoconservative era and George W. Bush and the Iraq War, obviously, which was disillusioning for huge numbers of Americans, and which has obviously affected the way that Tucker Carlson thinks, but also the way Vice President J.D. Vance thinks, as a returning veteran, disillusioned by all that. So there's that, and it's not a huge stretch to blame the Iraq War, as my book will go into, on the neocons, who are by and large Jews. And, at the time when people would criticize the neocons, they would push back that that was anti-Semitism. And sometimes it was, but there's just no denying that a group of mostly Jewish intellectuals pushed very hard for this war. And that some of the people who were anti-Semitic against them in the kind of Pat Buchanan paleocon wing of the party were often employing anti-Semitism as they made what turned out to be pretty cogent points about why we shouldn't invade Iraq. But I think
And Buchanan later in life in particular begins to truly associate with Holocaust deniers
yeah,
and like very, very explicitly in the 2010s, I believe.
yeah, and friend of the show, John Gans, of course, has a whole book about this that people can read about that wing of the conservatives, the paleocons. But putting all that aside, then more recently, I think there's what's happened with Trump, which is, Trump, I think, as Gans would argue, ran in part appealing to the paleocon wing of the party and kind of reviving it in its new alt-right form, which I think is pretty obviously true. But he's a more complicated figure than that. And, he's actually been surrounded by wealthy Jews in real estate his entire life. I don't actually think Trump is personally an anti-Semite, though
His daughter converted.
his daughter is married to Jared Kushner and converted to Orthodox Judaism. He's had like powerful Zionists in both of his administrations. And then, all these guys, these suckers, I think, who supported him because they thought he was like a realist restrainer and a peacenik candidate who would defy the neocons, all look incredibly stupid after this insane war that he started with Iran, which was blatantly started by Bibi Netanyahu coming to him and saying like, Israel's going to start a war with Iran and you need to join us. Something that he had tried on previous presidents in both parties who had all said no. And so it's actually straightforwardly true, and I have put this to many diehard Zionists, that the war in Iran, which has driven up the entire world's cost of living, gas prices, food prices, has been this total catastrophe and strategic humiliation for the U.S. And is totally unjustifiable. To a much more direct and obvious extent than the Iraq War, was caused by the Jewish state. Israel caused this war. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just a fact. It's in plain view. Everyone saw it happen. Leading figures in the administration have like blatantly said so. And then of course when Trump, as he's prone to doing, turns on a dime and screws over Israel and makes this worse from their point of view than the JCPOA deal with the Iranians. Like, who's mad at him? The neocons, the Israel lobby, the Jewish right, Israel itself. I mean, Trump is such a mercurial and unreliable figure that he can, piss off all sides of the same issue within the span of a few months. But certainly the moment that we're living through now, and then of course there's the whole Epstein business, right? Trump essentially trying to cover up his obvious degree of involvement with Epstein, who himself has become a kind of stand-in for all kinds of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories because he fits the template so well. This wealthy, well-connected Jewish financier who's running a secret pedophile ring, right? I mean, it's and has Israel ties. It's almost too on the nose. And
So, Dave, I do want to get to
so
I
so
don't.
to finish the questions is,
Yeah.
what is the function? I think there's a wing of the right that is looking beyond Trump, wisely, as he could, die within a few years, and he's technically not allowed to run for president again. And they are finding that since they can't be socialists, and they can't be like pro-Palestine peaceniks because that's not the constituency they're courting, that veiled or not that veiled anti-Semitism is actually a great way to cut ties with what the GOP establishment has been for the last 20 or so years.
I don't think it's a mystery why Vance has become the central political figure in this, right? Because it is a way to try and resolve the contradictions of Trump the way we imagined him, as you said, a realist restrainer, and the Trump that you actually get, who is fighting wars,
Right.
being talked into wars by Bibi Netanyahu. And Vance, looking to 28 and beyond, is in this place where he sees an opening to start criticizing Israel in ways that are not uh, not consistent. I mean, really not consistent with his own record, but not consistent with the sort of Republican Party orthodoxy over the last several decades. But there's an opening there, and Tucker and Candace Owens, all these people are sort of in that space already, and he's following where they go because it's a way to try and salvage MAGA from the tatters that this is sort of, I think, left it in intellectually.
Yeah, I want to build on that, David, and then I want to hear your response. I think, Derek, that is completely right. But then this is my is this just one discursive stream among many discursive streams? And like this one's particularly unappealing and virulent and racist, but as the normative world that New Deal liberalism created truly goes into the grave, this is just one of the things that's coming about. Because as you both well know, when the Tsar was talking about anti-Semitism, you get the Kishinev pogrom, or you get the hundreds of pogroms. When Hitler is talking about anti-Semitism in the 20s, you get the Nuremberg laws and the Holocaust. So, I mean, not to say that this isn't distasteful, that it's not repugnant, that it's not extraordinarily ugly, which it is. But if we're also trying to not just live in the realm of discourse, but connect it to politics, David, do you see as this being connected to actual politics? Are they going to start saying that Jews can't be part of the GOP, can't be part of the foreign policy establishment? Because one of the things that what I think the basically intellectual framework of structural racism does is that it allows you to move from discourse to practice. There are far number higher Black percentages of poverty. They're more harassed by the police, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we also need to talk about where the rubber hits the road here. Or is it, and not to say it's not scary, but or do you think this is mostly a discursive thing that is having a political organizing function like Derek is suggesting?
So I think Derek is largely right. I have sort of two answers to your question. One is, I'm not worried about the Holocaust or the Kishinev pogroms happening here. I just don't think that America as a whole is built that way. I mean, the Jews were a tiny and powerless minority surrounded by, yeah, you can point to some individual wealthy financiers or whatever, but I don't think they had nearly the power in those countries that they have in this one. But also, there's just a sense in which America is so pluralist and diverse in so many different ways, including geography and education and religion within the Christian paradigm, let alone beyond it. It's just, I find the idea of like a unitary, all-encompassing totalitarian American fascism still kind of hard to imagine. I think that we've seen there is a major fascist strain in this country that might attract, I'm going to call it fascism. I know that's controversial in some circles. I think it's basically fascism, but I think it appeals to, maybe a third of the country. And our political system might empower them to an extent, but there are still a lot of different, we still do have a basically free press. We still have a lot of federalism. We still have a somewhat independent judiciary. I mean, we're a long way from totalitarian dystopia, though not as far as I would like. But I do think, though, that especially the way our society is sort of mediated, mass mediated, social mediated, the likelihood that this will produce stochastic acts of violence and terrorism and anti-Semitism is high, I think, and some would argue has already been happening. So I think there's that danger. As far as like, would they bar Jews, quad Jews from the party? I'm very skeptical they would. But you mentioned Stephen Miller earlier, and I think he's kind of the model for what a Jew looks like firmly in the MAGA movement, right? He is Jewish, but they never bring it up. The only people who ever bring it up are critics like me, who are sort of pointing out, like, look, man, you're like from Belarus, just like I am. Like, aren't you ashamed of like what this means for your ancestors? Aren't you ashamed to seem like a Nazi? But we've been saying that for 10 years, and he's obviously not. And it's a very interesting biographical fact about him. But the fact is, the guy's whole rhetoric going back to high school, his high school yearbook, has that like Teddy Roosevelt quote about how there's no room for hyphenated Americans. His whole thing is he's an American, and you're either an American or you're not. And MAGA, which does have some diversity in it, certainly, and Candace Owens is a Black woman, right? Like, the important thing is not necessarily what your background is. It's that you vehemently affirm the primacy of Americanness and the disgusting outsiderness of anyone who doesn't. And I kind of think that's the version of nationalism, because it's hard to make anything else work in present day America. We're not
So,
we're not a 90% Anglo-Saxon nation, right? We're not even close to that. It just can't happen.
so I've this actually I do want to talk about Epstein in a couple of minutes, but what do you think the future of MAGA is? Because I'm bearish on the future of MAGA. I think they're losing their main support was young people. I think they're losing that. I think that it is going to be viewed as, this is a prediction, primarily organized around Trump. That it was one of the classic national populist responses to further liberalization in the terms of neoliberalization of society, but that I'm not sure that the total abandonment of any hegemonic project was going to result in MAGA lasting. And sort of like the core Trump um, group that you refer to, that's also just the core Republican. 30% of people are going to vote Republican no matter what. And I know some of them, and maybe they don't like Trump, but they're going to vote Republican. So I'm not sure that. I've said this on the podcast before. MAGA seems to me more like a dead cat bounce than actually a sort of Nazi-esque movement. I just mean in a sort of like Nazi movement built hegemony
Yeah.
in like a real sense, like totally Gleichschaltung German society in like a real way. And Trump has shown zero interest. I think he's interested in enriching his family primarily through like incredible levels of corruption. And I actually don't think MAGA is going to have much of a future. I think one of the scary defining feature of our moment is that it is all inchoate, and we could actually just be in an interregnum without a regnum coming in the future. But I'm curious, what do you think about MAGNA? As I think Trump is increasingly weak, he's increasingly lame duck. I think you see people increasingly starting to move away from him personally. I think they're going to get crushed in the midterms. I don't think he's going to run for a third term. I never thought he was going to run for a third term, but I really think he's not going to run now. And as General George S. Patton said, Americans don't like a loser. And I think Trump is increasingly coming off as a loser. But I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, I agree with most of your premises. I agree that Trump is a lame duck. I agree he's wildly unpopular. I agree that, I mean, he's old, and to the extent the Constitution still matters, which is always questionable, but to the extent it does, he's not allowed to run again. But he's, actuarially not in a great space to anyway. So I would probably bet against him being the nominee in 2 years. I do think they're going to take a huge hit in the midterms. And I certainly hope you're right. I certainly want to see the fever break, as it will. And whether it will be called MAGA is, things get rebranded all the time. But I think what I don't think will happen is I don't think we will cease being a country where a very large percent of the population and the political class and elected Republicans are bigots and conspiracy mongers and, part of this kind of like fever swamp that was always there, but that has really been brought to the fore. I don't think we're going to go back to the kind of like respectable establishment WASP / neocon, like polite civil republicanism that we knew before 2016. I think that's dead. And I also, much as I would like this not to be right, don't think that the Democrats are going to successfully, recreate the New Deal or a kind of new permanent liberal or socialist ruling establishment. I mean, I think there are people who are going to take their shot at that, and I wish them all the best and hope to support it in some way. But I think what will actually happen is I think we're in a state of advanced decline, which Trump has accelerated in many ways by damaging our relationship with the entire world, including like not just our image, but like our actual trade relations and so on, and military relations with the entire world. I think we are declining from this unprecedented level of global power and prestige and hegemony, and that will continue. And our politics will be a mess. I mean, in some ways, I think the future of MAGA, but also just the future of American politics, is kind of what you see in Britain right now. This just like sad, declining, ungovernable country that can't keep a prime minister for very long. Obviously, our system works differently and the cycles work differently, but the basic idea that maybe we get a president AOC or a president Ossoff or whatever, then it turns out America is still dysfunctional and miserable, and the oligarch-controlled media gets everyone mad. Then it's President Tucker Carlson, and that's kind of what I see happening for the foreseeable future. Just like some short-term wins followed by the inertia, followed by horrible backlash, and the just general decline of the American polity. That would be my bet.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I am right now. I think that there was a moment, and it's funny, as time goes on and on, I think Obama was a worse and worse president. I mean, I think there was a genuine opening in 2008 and 2009 to do a general reformation of a clearly failed neoliberal economy. And he actually just did the exact opposite. He just
had no inclination to do
well,
that.
I know.
I
It's just not who
agree
he
that
was.
would have been the moment for some like,
Anti-monopoly,
to have some like Lincoln
anti-financialization.
FDR, sense of himself as a man of destiny beyond like, I gave everybody hope by getting elected as a black president. And he just didn't do that. That's just not who he is.
Yeah, I mean, I think like not only did he not do that, but he accelerated the monopolization and the financialization. I mean, the zero interest rates, like when you go in to do these case studies of these sectors, it just gave money to the already rich to buy the entire sector that they're in. And this is true whether you're talking about Hollywood or healthcare. And it's just like, not only did he not do the thing, he accelerated the bad stuff, which is truly wild. And it's just like depressing. I mean,
There's a lot of truth to that. And I also think at a more mundane level, but I was reminded of it during like the rollout of his presidential center. He also, I think, just for like a lot of rank and file liberalism, he really defined for a generation what it is they have to expect from liberalism, which is basically like it makes us feel good about ourselves, right? Like the way they celebrate his era, which I find increasingly grating, is like, wasn't that a nice, dignified time when we had a president and a first lady who looked like this? And when, like all the most beloved American celebrities and people around the world loved the American president, loved our institutions, and they carried themselves with such grace and dignity. I'm like, yeah, I remember that. I liked that. I voted for it twice. Like, that was nice in some ways, but what the fuck does that do for any of us now, right? Like you didn't build a durable system that could outlast you. You didn't pick. You had terrible taste in successors twice. You let the country fall into the hands of a deranged demagogue who has rolled back more progress than you were remotely capable of advancing. Like what? So now we're just gonna like bask forever in the memory of when we had a president who wasn't embarrassing. Like it's sad, but I get the sense he's still very popular, and I get the sense there are millions of Democrats who like, because politics to them is pretty much a question of the media they consume. That is what they miss. They just miss having a guy they can feel that way about.
Yeah, it's really grim. I mean, I think you're not unless a future president takes on monopolization and financialization, which seems very, very difficult to do at this time. I don't know how we'll ever be put on an even more slightly correct path. So, David, I think we should have you back for Epstein because I don't want to shut that into 15 minutes. But I think why don't we talk
Can
about
we?
what? Sorry,
Maybe we
Dave.
could talk about to get out of the right wing space and the politics space to talk about mainstream media and how it's sort of contributing to this problem. And I think like I would look at two
Let's talk
examples.
about Barry.
Yeah, maybe we can talk about Barry.
Well, I do want to make
Like,
sure. I do want to make sure
Yeah.
we get to the left anti-Semitism piece.
Yeah. Let's talk
Yeah.
about that, and then let's talk about Barry. Go.
All right. Well, yeah. So, I mean, Barry, what is
Do it, David.
what?
Do it. God damn it.
What is there to say about Barry at this point? I mean, I would say these days I'm pretty focused on just how catastrophically she's missed.
Well, let's talk about the left-wing anti-Semitism.
Yeah, let's do left wing first because I have a question about it's sort of Barry adjacent, but yeah.
Well, let's do left-wing
Let's do
anti-Semitism.
left-wing.
Jay, keep this in. They should see how the sausage is made.
Okay.
Let's talk about. All right, David. So let's talk about left-wing anti-Semitism. What do you mean? Because that's usually been a canard.
Yeah.
But we're seeing more of it recently.
So as I said early in this talk, I do think that the vast majority of what's been called left-wing anti-Semitism is just a slander, often of people like me. It's people like me getting called capos by right-wing Jews because we criticize Israel and we criticize the Jewish establishment. And I've been called capo and similar, or a lot of them they love Yevsektia, this reference to the Soviet Jews who turned against the Jewish religion and Zionism. Barry Weiss actually loves that one. So yeah, there's a whole nonsense language about this. However, it gives me zero pleasure to say this, but there is, I think, in the current discursive environment, where we should say also Israel's popularity has just absolutely fallen through the floor in the last year. Or even 6 months. I mean, just precipitous drops across the board, left and right. Israel was popular in America among both Democrats and Republicans. It is no longer popular. There are entirely coherent and frankly deserved reasons for this, which we've discussed, mostly involving the Gaza genocide and the war in Iran. The tone of the right's reaction against Israel can be more nationalist and America first. Why are we doing all this for another country? The tone on the left is obviously more about the humanity of Palestinians. Sometimes there's overlap between those two things. But that's the general shape of things. The people, the Jewish establishment, the Jewish right, who've been, and even Jewish center libs who have been complaining about anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism as a form of anti-Semitism all along, are freaking out right now, kind of understandably, because anti-Zionism actually is skyrocketing. And with it, I think a space has opened for some more blatant anti-Semitism. Now, we've talked a lot about what that looks like on the right, where I think it's much further along. But I do see a version of it, mostly online, mostly in kind of fringe online accounts that sometimes will swarm me or other people, which I feel like a bit of a loser complaining about. But I think if recent history has shown us anything, it's that fringe, crazy seeming online tendencies don't just stay online. They do metastasize. They do make it into wider discourse. That certainly has happened on the right. And it's happened in more positive ways on the left, too. I mean, I think the rise of, DSA as a mainstream movement, for a while it was left-wing shit posters, and then suddenly they're winning elections, right? We're winning elections. Or trans activism, like a lot of stuff has just really, online creates a space for it. So that's why I do want to not totally dismiss this phenomenon. I see I'm being, there's a lot of preamble and throat clearing here because I'm worried about who I might offend. And I know I'm going to offend someone if they actually listen to this. But
if they actually listen to this,
no, I realize that everyone on the left hangs on to
anybody. Yeah, if anybody tunes in, I mean, yeah.
Right. But what does it look like, left-wing anti-Semitism, as distinct from all the things that get erroneously or maliciously labeled that? One discourse that I've seen popping up a lot recently, and it's often targeted at people like me or some of my colleagues at Jewish Currents, people like Ariel Angel or Peter Beinart, and we're talking about Jews who've basically built our public profiles on being outspokenly anti-Zionist. That's like the core of our political identity online, or or Molly Crabapple with her recent brilliant book on the Bund, right? Like people who I think have just unimpeachable anti-Zionist Jewish bona fides and are I'm flattering myself by putting myself in this company, but leading voices on the Jewish left, right? Or I don't know. This has probably happened to you too, Danny. I don't know. What I have seen lately is this discourse attacking the centering of Jewish feelings, where if I were to write a piece like the one I wrote in The Nation, or the Epstein piece I wrote, or any of the numerous pieces I've written talking about, the failure of liberal Zionism, or piece I wrote in NYRB 2 years ago about that is there even room for left-wing Jews in Jewish spaces anymore? All of this is considered illegitimate, indulgent, and offensive, because how dare you write about anything? I mean, really, it's how dare you, the Jew, write about anything? Even sometimes we get called Zionists by the genre of left-wing critic I'm talking about, because simply to identify as a Jew at all or call any attention to it at all is to affirm Zionism, even in the breach. Or I've been attacked by someone for using the term diasporic Jewry, because they're like, well, what are we a diaspora from? I mean, there are actual answers to that, which I could get into in great detail. It's, in my family's case, it's not Israel, unless you want to talk about 2,000 years ago, which I don't really, but there is a Jewish diaspora, a huge one just from the Pale of Settlement alone, that's just a historical fact and has absolutely shaped, so many things. And this notion, don't center Jewish feelings, I mean, I interpret that pretty directly to mean, shut up, Jew. Don't talk as a Jew at all. Don't represent yourself as a Jew at all. Maybe just don't talk, period. All of the Jews I mentioned and more have I think worked hard to elevate Palestinian and Arab and Muslim and all kinds of other anti-Zionist voices, and the wider left coalition. Jewish Currents certainly has, and I think and tried to align itself with that, with I think a great deal of success. This notion that Jews should step back from the discourse is, I think, first of all, it's offensive in a way that kind of smacks of the woke 1.0 that's becoming more and more unfashionable on the left, for good reason generally. This sort of obsession with standpoint epistemology, the idea that what you're saying matters less than who you are and what privileges you plead to. I mean, I always thought a certain amount of that is appropriate. People should be aware of their privilege, self-conscious of it, admit blind spots, but at the point where people are like, who are you to talk about this, Jew? I feel like that's become an incredibly destructive and illiberal strategy. Most people hate it. I think it's done a lot of damage to the left. I think a lot of people who've gone along with it, myself included in the past, were often not happy that we were doing it. It's a logic that basically elevates demagogues and know-nothings. It rewards them over people who actually know what they're talking about. And on the issue of Zionism specifically, I don't know how anyone thinks they're going to defeat Zionism and its stranglehold over American politics without talking to Jews who've been in the thick of it, without us. I've been pretty radical in what I've said we should do. I mean, I'm constantly arguing to Jews I know who have the same politics as me, like, how are you still attending a Reform synagogue and paying dues to a Reform synagogue when it has an Israeli flag on the bima? I get in fights with friends and family about that all the time. Would you rather I not be saying that? Would you rather I not be talking about ways we can pressure Jewish institutions from within? I get the sense that there are people out there who basically want all Jews to be Zionists so that they can hate us more efficiently, and are offended by the idea of, let's say, trying to, through the history of the Bund or whatever, recreate a usable past that doesn't involve Zionism from thousands of years of Jewish history. And so I find that a troublesome tendency. I also just sometimes encounter rhetoric that I think goes beyond merely calling Israel a genocidal state or Zionism a genocidal ideology to, like, I'm not going to cite any examples, but like this does exist. Just a very visceral bloodlust I can detect, just a sense of like libidinal pleasure at talking about Jews as vermin or parasites. Well, Zionists, but as vermin or parasites, that I think does absolutely nothing to advance the case rhetorically. I understand why people are angry. And in some ways, and this is the last point I think I'll make in this, I actually see this as a kind of, in the hurt people sense, as a kind of like, Zionism has produced this much as Nazism produced what Zionism has been since 1945, right? Like Israel, Zionism predates the Holocaust, obviously, and the ideology and all of the ways it went wrong, like, have pre-Holocaust roots. And I want to be clear, I understand that. But for the last 80 years, at the center of Israel and at the center of diasporic, I'm going to use that word, Zionist logic in defense of Israel, Hasbara, and so on, is this sense of deep woundedness, this sense that, look at what the Nazis did to us. And because the Nazis did that to us, the way we're going to assert power in the world is by doing the same things to another weaker people, because all that matters is the Jews, right? I mean, it's basically just the logic of fascism and Nazism absorbed by its former victims. I don't think in the main that's what Palestinians or the Palestinian activist community or the Palestinian liberation movement, that I don't think that's what it is in the main. But sometimes I see people who rhetorically, it's like, oh, I get it. Like, you have witnessed a genocide. You are witnessing in the present tense a genocide. You're witnessing horrific inhumanity, and you're internalizing it. And you are, articulating a justification for a sort of nihilistic, violent illiberalism. And I don't want to talk about this any longer than I have, really, because I don't think it's as important as the genocide itself. I don't think it's as important as the neo-Nazi or Islamophobic right. I don't think it's as important as the struggle that I'm still very much involved in to, end Zionist dominance in this country. But I do think it's a real emerging and troubling trend. And I still, at the end of the day, I think blame the Jewish establishment to a large extent for it, because I think they have so, as Ezra Klein said, they have so equated Judaism and Zionism and anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism that they've really opened the door for this kind of thing.
So, David, maybe, I mean, this could be a concluding question, I guess, because it kind of has to do with where you see this discourse going. But I want to ask about to get back to the issue of the mainstream media making this problem worse by refusing to separate criticism of Israel from anti-Semitism. And there was just an interview on with Jake Tapper on CNN with Dan Goldman, who just lost his primary to
That's
Brad
right.
Lander, self-described liberal Zionist,
Yep.
that was all about left-wing
Good dude.
anti-Semitism.
I will vouch for Brad Lander as a dude. I have known him for a while. Most left-wing Jews in Brooklyn have, and he's great. And I'm so happy he won, and won big. But anyway, go on.
But just the tenor of this interview, which was basically that, like, Dan Goldman lost to a self-described liberal Zionist because of anti-Semitism, and that left-wing anti-Semitism is a problem because Dan Goldman lost his seat. Like, it again gets to conflating Israel and anti-Semitism in a way that I think is very harmful and very dangerous, and that you've written about. I know CNN is going to become part of the Barry Weiss news empire soon. She's already doing this with CBS. So are we just going to get more of this? Like, as this becomes a bigger and bigger issue, are we just going to see the mainstream media continuing to like insist on this conflation, even though it is supremely unhelpful and dangerous? Or do you think there's going to be a point? Do you see any indication that we're going to get to a point where this could change at that level, at the level of network news or major media, major newspapers, that type of thing?
It's a great question. I think both Will Menaker and I have at different points snarked. Uh, you know, if watching Jake Tapper or watching Dana Bash, who I think is even worse on CNN, like if Barry Weiss takes over CNN, like will we even notice the difference, basically? But like how much worse could it get? But I know the answer to that is it could get a lot worse. They could get rid of people who are at least competent at their jobs, like Anderson Cooper, and they could put Olivia Reingold in prime time. I mean, things can always get worse as we keep learning. I am, as you guys know, a very close Barry Weiss watcher, and I've written a lot about her. And I knew her in college 20 years ago. And I have been fascinated by her tenure at CBS because by any measure, except maybe the one that really counts, it's a total disaster for her. I mean, I argue about this with friends all the time, and I taped a podcast with Jeet here recently where we sort of debated this. Is Barry succeeding or failing? By any conventional metric for how do you run a TV news network, she is failing. Ratings are drastically down. She's ruined morning news. She's ruined evening news. She's ruined 60 Minutes, which 60 Minutes was thriving despite her when she, for the first almost year she was there, when she left it alone, their ratings were way up. They were profitable. They were valuable. And she went ahead and ruined them too, as has been extensively documented. And one reason it's all been extensively documented is because essentially nobody in the vast organization that is CBS respects her or takes her seriously. So there are constant leaks to every single media reporter in the business. So we see every meeting she's in. She is like holed up in a bunker now, basically not meeting with people. So we see the meetings her toadies are in, like Nick Bilton instead. It's farcical, right? And just at the level of basic execution, like when they couldn't get Tony DeCouple into China when everyone else did. I mean, it's just embarrassing, and very satisfying for longtime critics of Barry to see how this person, sure enough, has zero talent and qualifications for any TV news network. On the other hand, people will say, well, look, she was hired for one purpose, which was to get Donald Trump to approve this Paramount Warner Brothers merger. She's supposed to, so everything she's doing is actually good. All the damage she's doing to this beloved liberal legacy institution is actually good, and Trump loves it. And David Ellison, who hired her for this purpose, loves it. And then she's going to get CNN, and it's going to work the same way. With all the reporting and rumors that come out, it's actually not. I mean, that's obviously to some extent true. That is why she was hired, at least to a large part. And the deal does seem to be going through. Though there's people are always raising like additional, some case in California or whatever. I don't really understand the relevant moving parts here. But I will say it's not totally clear that she will get control of CNN, even if all of this does go through. And there are plenty of people who wonder how long she can last at CBS, because once Ellison does get what he wants, which is Warner Brothers, does he need Barry Weiss to run CNN particularly? And does he, all things being equal, does he actually like seeing, CNN is a much more valuable thing to own than CBS. Does he like seeing it get ground into dust by this totally incompetent person who doesn't know what a TV is? I will refrain from making predictions because this whole thing is such a bizarre and unprecedented situation. But it is, I would not assume that Barry does in fact end up running like half of TV news, or indeed that she's that valuable to them in her current role once all the papers are signed. And to Derek's larger question, which is, could I see like anti-Semitic voices breaking into the mainstream as Zionist oligarchs consolidate control over media? Yes, not necessarily in the most straightforward way. I mean, it's not like someone is going to invent a new left-wing CNN that has smart commentary about Israel on it overnight. But media as we know it is fracturing and being reinvented in so many different ways. I wouldn't assume that who controls the big news. I mean, some people are arguing that the reason Barry is able to casually destroy CBS and its ratings is because everyone is working under the assumption that TV news won't matter in 5 years, right? So who cares? Let's just kill that audience and build something new from scratch. And if that is the plan, there are lots of different ways that people can get attention and build audiences these days in the sort of chaotic media environment that we're in right now. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean Hassan Piker or you guys or Chapo Trap House are going to have the same clout or importance that CNN or Fox or, for that matter, Tucker Carlson has. But but I wouldn't write it off either. I think that if you take a step back, there is a lot more vocal criticism of Israel circulating in mainstream discourse and in mainstream politics now than there was 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, when the media environment was nothing like it is now. So in some ways, I see what they're doing as a kind of rearguard effort to stop that by consolidating oligarch control of media. But I don't know that it's necessarily going to be successful at changing any minds.
I think that's a good place to end. David, thank you so much. I'd love to have you back on again soon to talk about the other article on Epstein. Everyone check out David's work. You're still on Twitter. What's your Twitter name?
Just
David Klion? Yeah, I would say Klion. God damn it. Yeah. David Klion at Twitter, twitter.com, and his work at the Jewish Currents.
It's X the everything site. I mean, really,
X the everything site.
Elon, I'm your man here.
Of how a billionaire took over a huge social media platform and made it way shittier and way more right-coded. And yet there's remains to this day thriving left-wing voices on the platform.
Here we are. We'll be with it till the end. We're the band playing on the deck of the Titanic.
Yeah.
Love to have you back again soon, man. Everyone, thanks for listening. Subscribe to the YouTube page, and as always, keep on rocking in the free world. Bye.
Bye, guys.